She didn't come here to win. She came because someone handed her a golden invitation and smiled like it was a gift. It wasn't. Celeste Dane walked into the most powerful room in the city, wearing a borrowed dress, holding a glass of water, and carrying the quiet weight of a woman who already knew something was wrong, but refused to turn back. She had no connections, no family name, no safety net. What she had was something rarer and far more dangerous to the people who'd set the trap. She had nothing to lose. And in a room full of people performing for each other, pretending, calculating, positioning, a man who had seen every version of that game looked down from above and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. Not about her dress, not about who she knew, about why she wasn't running. Diana Voss had invited Celeste to be the evening's quiet entertainment, the girl who didn't belong, flushing red and excusing herself before dessert. Instead, she handed her something she never intended to give, the attention of the most untouchable man in the room, and everything that came after it. The Murano Grand Hotel didn't welcome you. It assessed you. 40 floors of black glass and gold trim rising above the city like a monument to everything money could silence. Doormen in white gloves who never smiled. Women in gowns that cost more than 6 months of Celeste's rent, moving through the lobby like they'd been born knowing how to take up exactly the right amount of space. Celeste had walked 6 blocks to get here because she couldn't afford the valet. She'd borrowed the dress. Deep burgundy, floor-length, simple, from a coworker who was roughly her size. She'd done her own hair. She'd practiced, not looking like she was practicing. She stepped through the entrance, and she felt it immediately. Not hostility. Worse, assessment. The kind of slow, invisible scan that rooms like this ran on people the moment they arrived. Cataloging you, pricing you, filing you. She saw Diana Voss before Diana saw her, standing at the center of a group of 8 women near the champagne tower, laughing the specific laugh of someone who already knew the punchline. The moment Diana spotted Celeste, she lifted her glass in a small, elegant toast. There it is. Celeste understood the whole architecture of the evening in that single gesture. The invitation wasn't generosity, it was casting. She was the entertainment. The girl in the borrowed dress dropped into a gilded room so Diana Circle could watch her drown, slowly, beautifully, in front of everyone. She had 2 choices: leave and give Diana exactly what she'd planned for, or stay and refuse to perform the scene they'd written for her. Celeste accepted a glass of water from a passing tray. Not champagne, water, deliberate, steady. She lifted her chin and walked deeper into the room. She didn't scan faces looking for someone important. She didn't reach for her phone. She moved along the far wall where the foundation's charitable photography was displayed. Decades of work, framed in quiet rows. And she stopped. And she read. Not skimmed. Read. A 1987 literacy initiative. 63 schools funded in 18 months across underserved districts. A photograph of a classroom. Children at desks, a teacher at the board. Natural light coming through windows that had clearly just been installed. Something about it grounded her. She didn't notice the man on the mezzanine above. She didn't notice that he had stopped moving the moment she stopped at those photographs. She didn't notice that his head of security had leaned close and said something low, and that the man had responded with a single, quiet question. She was too busy reading about 63 schools. She was too busy being the only real thing in the room. And that was exactly why he noticed her.
Dante Murano had hosted this gala 11 times. He could have done it with his eyes closed. The same donors, the same speeches, the same careful performance of generosity from people who needed the tax receipts more than they needed the cause. He stood on the mezzanine with a glass of scotch he hadn't touched and watched the room the way his father had taught him, not for beauty, but for truth. Most people down there were lying about something. Their net worth, their marriages, their intentions, the smiles that didn't reach their eyes, and the handshakes that lasted a half second too long. Dante had learned to read it all before he was 20. By 25, he'd stopped finding it interesting. Tonight was no different, until it was. Marco appeared at his shoulder, head of security, 15 years in, the kind of man who only spoke when something was worth saying. "The Voss table brought someone," Marco said quietly, "not a regular." Dante's gaze shifted. He found her immediately. Burgundy dress, water glass, not champagne, standing alone at the foundation wall, not scanning the room, not performing for anyone. Reading. He tracked right to Diana Voss, who was watching the girl with a smile like a cat that had already decided to play slowly. He understood the game. What he didn't understand, what made him stay very still for a long moment, was the girl herself. She should have been uncomfortable. She should have been mapping the room, calculating exits, looking for an ally or a mirror or something to hide behind. Instead, she stood in front of a photograph of a 1987 classroom and read like she was alone in a library. "What's her name?" Dante asked. Marco paused, the pause of a man who hadn't expected that question. "I'll find out." Dante watched her move from one photograph to the next, unhurried, quietly focused, completely unbothered by the fact that she was the worst-dressed woman in a room full of people who wore their net worth on their bodies. He had met heads of state in this ballroom, senators, billionaires, criminals who smiled better than politicians. Not one of them had ever stood in his room and simply been present in it. Marco returned in 4 minutes with a name and a single-paragraph background. Celeste Dane, 23, catering company employee. No connections to anyone in the room. No angle, no agenda. Dante read it once, set it down, picked up his scotch, the first sip of the evening, and made a decision he hadn't made in 11 years of hosting this event. He was going to the floor. Diana moved at 9:47 p.m. Celeste saw it coming from 30 feet away, the purposeful pivot, the casual wave of the hand that assembled her circle like a director calling cast to their marks. 8 women falling into formation without appearing to, an audience that didn't look like one. Before we go further, if you're new here, this is Love in the Underworld. We tell stories where the woman everyone underestimates becomes the one the most powerful man can't stop choosing. Subscribe and hit the bell, because this story is just getting started. "Celeste!" Diana's voice was warm enough to fool anyone who hadn't felt the cold underneath it. "You look wonderful. I'm so glad you came." "Diana, I was just telling everyone how we met." A light gesture, casual, practiced. "She works for the catering company we use for our private events. Isn't that lovely? She's been so hardworking. She mentioned she's helping her father with some financial difficulties." Silence. The specific, surgical silence of a room that had just heard something true deployed as a weapon. Every word Diana said was accurate. That was the architecture of it. No lie to defend against, just truth arranged to the perfect angle to cut. She's a servant. She's poor. She doesn't belong here. Celeste felt the heat rise fast behind her eyes. She breathed through it. "My father worked hard his entire life. Helping him isn't something I'm ashamed of. Not everyone in this room can say the same about their families." A flicker. Small. Diana's smile didn't move, but something behind it did. "Of course," Diana said smoothly. "That kind of simplicity is so refreshing." And then, from directly behind Diana's left shoulder, a voice. Low, unhurried, carrying no effort and all authority. "Miss Voss." Diana turned, and the color left her face. Dante Murano stood 2 feet away. He was not looking at Diana. He had not looked at Diana once. His eyes were on Celeste, fully, quietly, with the specific attention of a man who had already made up his mind about something
and was simply following through. 20 people watched. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke, because Dante Murano did not come to the floor. Dante Murano did not cross a room. Dante Murano did not appear behind you without a reason that was going to matter. And right now, the reason was standing in a burgundy dress holding a glass of water, looking back at him like she wasn't afraid.
"I don't believe we've met," he said, still to Celeste. "Diana might as well have been wallpaper." "We haven't," Celeste said. "Dante Murano." He extended his hand. She took it. He held it one beat longer than courtesy required. Not possession, not performance. Something else, like confirmation. "Celeste Dane." "You were reading the Foundation photographs earlier," he said. "The 1987 initiative?" She blinked, genuinely surprised he'd noticed from that distance. 63 schools in 18 months. That's not nothing. Something moved in his face, barely visible, but there. "No," he said, "it isn't." He turned to Diana, not with anger, not with coldness, with something more devastating, complete indifference. "Miss Voss, I believe your table is on the east side of the room." 4 words functioning as an execution. Diana's mouth opened, closed. The smile she produced cost her something. Every person in that circle watched it happen, watched her absorb the quiet, public, total dismissal from the man whose name was on the building. "Of course," she said. "Enjoy your evening, Dante." She left, her entire circle folded in behind her without a word. 20 feet away, someone laughed at something unrelated. The gala continued. Music, crystal, the warm blur of wealth and motion. Dante and Celeste stood in the small quiet he had carved out of it. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "No," I agreed, "I didn't." "Then why?" He was quiet for a moment. Dante Murano was a man who said things when he meant them and said nothing when he didn't. The pause wasn't discomfort, it was precision. "Because I've watched people work this room for 15 years, he said, "and I've never once seen someone stand in it the way you were standing in it." "Like I didn't belong?" "Like you didn't need to." Celeste looked at him, really looked at him, and found something she hadn't expected. Not arrogance, not the cold calculation of the man who ran half the city's private empire. Exhaustion. The specific, quiet exhaustion of someone who had spent years surrounded by performance and nearly forgotten what it felt like to be in the presence of something real. She filed that away and said nothing about it, because some things you notice and hold carefully, because pointing at them too soon breaks them. She was very good at knowing the difference. They stayed in that pocket of space for 40 minutes. Nobody interrupted. Nobody approached. Marco positioned himself at a subtle 15-foot radius and made sure of it without being asked. "I almost left," Celeste admitted, "when I figured out why she invited me." "Why didn't you?" "Because leaving meant she won, and I'm not very good at letting people win when they're being cruel about it." Dante studied her. "Most people would have left anyway. Dignity has a price. Most people pay it." "Dignity isn't leaving," she said simply. "Dignity is staying and refusing to perform the scene they wrote for you." He was quiet. "Then, how old are you?" 23. "How old are you?" 31. "You look tired for 31. He laughed. Not a polite laugh, not the calibrated, socially appropriate response of a man at his own event managing an unexpected guest. A real laugh, short, quiet, surprised out of him, like it had been a while. "The foundation work," she said. "Do you actually care about it, or is it a tax strategy?" he finished. "Both, initially. My father started it for optics. I continued it for the same reason." He paused. "Then I hired a director who actually believed in it. She changed the numbers in ways that made no financial sense, and the schools worked anyway." "So now you care?" "Because she believed it would work before it did." Celeste went quiet.
That's rare, she said softly. People who believe things before they have proof? Extremely, he said. He was looking at her when he said it. Around them, the gala was beginning its slow wind-down, conversations lengthening, guests drifting toward the exit. The staff was repositioning trays. The orchestra had shifted to something quieter. Neither of them had moved. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask me anything. Why did you actually come down?" He considered the lie. He was fluent in it. 15 years of rooms like this had made him masterful. But the lie felt like a waste right now, like spending something valuable on something worthless. "Because you were the only person in this room tonight who wasn't performing, and I've been performing so long I'd almost stopped noticing." She held his gaze, didn't fill the silence with reassurance or deflection, just held it, steady, unhurried, like a woman who understood that some things needed space to land properly. "So what happens now?" she asked. "It depends. Do you have somewhere to be?" Diana Voss watched from the east side of the ballroom. She held her champagne glass with 2 fingers instead of 3, a small tell that only people who knew her well would recognize. A crack in the composure. Hairline thin, but there. She had run this play before. Invite someone who didn't belong. Let the room do what rooms like this always did. Assess, dismiss, humiliate by atmosphere alone. The girl would feel it, flush, excuse herself. Diana would express concern afterward, just loudly enough for the right people to hear. "Oh, I thought it would be good for her. I didn't realize she'd be so uncomfortable." Clean, elegant, the kind of cruelty that left no fingerprints. Instead, she watched Dante Marano. Dante Marano, who had not personally engaged with a new guest at this event in 6 years, stand in the center of his own ballroom and give a catering company employee his complete and undivided attention for 40 minutes. She watched him bring Celeste wine, not a staff member, him, moving through his own gala like a man who had somewhere specific to be, and that place was beside this woman in a borrowed dress. She watched the room, watching them, the whispers starting like small fires, one table, then the next, then spreading outward through the ballroom with the specific velocity of information that everyone knew mattered, but no one yet understood. Who is she? Does she know him? How does she know him? Has he met her before? The questions moved through the room like a current. Diana could feel them, could feel her own name dropping out of those conversations, could feel the quiet redirect, the shift of attention away from her table, her circle, her carefully constructed evening. She had built her entire world on proximity to power, on being the woman the room tracked, on being the name attached to the right events, the right tables, the right photographs. And tonight, in the room she had arranged, in the story she had authored, she had become a supporting character in someone else's scene. She had brought the wrong girl to the wrong room and handed her directly to the one man in the city whose attention could rewrite everything. Diana finished her champagne, set the glass down, smiled at something a woman beside her said, bright, practiced, perfect, and began quietly calculating the cost of what she'd done. Because in rooms like this, mistakes didn't disappear, they compounded. And Diana Voss had just made one in front of everyone, including the man who never forgot anything.
At 11:15 p.m., Dante walked Celeste to the coat check. He did it himself. Staff members moved aside without being told. The specific choreography of people who understood hierarchy without needing it spelled out. "You've been here all evening," she said. "Don't you have, I don't know, things to do? People to speak to?" "I spoke to the people I needed to speak to before you arrived." "You didn't know I was arriving?" "No," he said, "I didn't." He retrieved her coat and held it for her. She paused, just for a half second at the gesture. Not discomfort, recalibration, like someone adjusting to a temperature change. "Your foundation director," she said, sliding her arms through the sleeves. "The one who believed before she had proof. What happened to her?"
She ran the program for 7 years, left to start her own nonprofit in West Africa. A pause. We still fund it. Do you miss her? The question landed differently than she intended. She could see it, the slight recalibration in his expression. She was the most competent person I've ever employed, he said carefully. That's not what I asked. He looked at her. Yes, he said. I miss what it felt like to have someone in the room who was working towards something real. And now everyone in the room is working towards something, just not anything real. Celeste buttoned her coat, simple, unhurried. Outside, through the hotel's glass doors, the city was dark and cold and indifferent. I read about the 1987 program because something in that photograph stopped me, she said. The classroom, the windows. Someone had just installed them, you could tell by the frames. New, clean. And I thought, someone fought for those windows. Someone wrote that into a budget and defended it in a meeting full of people who didn't think windows mattered. Dante was very still. That's exactly what happened, he said quietly. My father almost cut it as a line item. But someone didn't let him. No. That's the part that matters, she said. Not the money, the believing. He looked at her for a long moment. The kind of look that isn't cataloging, isn't measuring or calculating or strategizing. The kind of look that is simply registering, receiving. The specific attention of someone who has spent a long time not being surprised by people, encountering one who surprised him. Can I ask you something? He said. You can ask me anything, she said, and gave him his own words back without smiling. He noticed. Why did you actually stay? She looked at him. Because leaving would have been the easy thing, and easy things are rarely the true ones. He didn't ask for her number. He didn't suggest dinner. He didn't do any of the things that men with his kind of power typically did when they decided they wanted something. The smooth assumption, the casual possession disguised as invitation. He walked her through the lobby. His car was already at the curb. Black sedan, engine running, driver who looked straight ahead. I walked here, she said. I know. It's 38 degrees. She looked at him. You looked me up. Marco did, after I asked your name. No apology, just honesty, clean and unadorned. I needed to know if you were connected to anyone in that room. And if I had been, I wouldn't have come down. She processed that. So I'm safe to talk to because I'm nobody? You're worth talking to because you're nobodies, he said. That's not the same thing. The car was warm. The city scrolled past outside, lit windows, empty intersections, the particular quiet that falls over a city after midnight when the performance of the day is finally done. Celeste watched it and said nothing. Dante, beside her, also said nothing. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who were comfortable enough in their own presence not to need to fill it, which told each of them something about the other. Her building was a walk-up on a street that was exactly what it looked like. No pretense, no architectural ambition, just a building where people came home to. The car stopped. Dante didn't move to get out, didn't extend the evening with elaborate goodbye. But as she opened the door, cold air rushing in from outside, he spoke. The Foundation's spring event is in 6 weeks. She turned back. I'd like you to come. As a guest? As my guest. The difference lived in a single word, and they both knew what it meant, not just socially, not just in terms of proximity and access. In his world, being his guest meant something specific. It meant placement, visibility. It meant standing in a room and having the answer to who is she be she's with him. Celeste held the door open. The city breathed cold air around her. I'll think about it, she said. Not yes, not no, not performance in either direction, just the truth, which was that she needed to think. Dante looked at her from the warmth of the car. That's all I'm asking, he said. She stepped out, walked to her door without looking back, and Dante Morano, the man who ran half this city without asking anyone's permission for anything, sat in his car and waited until her light came on. Then he told his driver to go. Three things happened in the 6 weeks that followed. Diana Voss stopped receiving invitations to the Murano Foundation's private donor events. No announcement, no call, no explanation at all. Just a quiet, permanent removal from the list that had defined her social calendar for 9 years. She found out when a colleague mentioned attending a dinner she hadn't heard about. She smiled and said she'd had a conflict that night. She said it very well. She'd had a lot of practice. Marco ran a full background report on Celeste Dane, cross-referenced twice, flagged 0 concerns, left it on Dante's desk without being asked, because Marco had worked for Dante long enough to understand that when his employer asked a woman's name in the middle of a gala, a standard follow-up was appropriate. Dante read the report once, set it in a drawer, did not reference it again. Because some things are due diligence, and some things, after a point, are just noise. And Celeste, in her apartment on the 4th floor of a walk-up 6 blocks from the hotel, opened her laptop at 1 a.m. and looked up the Murano Foundation's charitable history. She read every public document they had: the 1987 Literacy Initiative, the 1993 Housing Program, the 2009 Early Childhood Education expansion that had funded 42 new kindergartens across the district. She read until 3 a.m., not because she was calculating anything, not because she was preparing for an answer she hadn't given yet, because Dante had said somewhere around year 3 she believed it would work, before it did. And Celeste had spent her entire life being the person who believed things before she had proof. She thought about the photograph, the classroom, the windows someone had fought for in a budget meeting full of people who didn't think windows mattered. She thought about a man on the mezzanine who looked tired in the specific way that people look tired when they've been performing for too long, not from the work, but from the pretending. She thought about the car idling at her curb, the warmth of it, the silence that hadn't needed filling. She thought about "as my guest" and the weight those 2 words carried in his world. At 3:17 a.m., she closed her laptop, sat in the dark for a moment, and reached for her phone.
Diana had built the evening to break her. She'd handed Celeste a golden invitation like a trap with a bow on it and waited for the collapse, the flush, the quiet retreat of a woman who'd finally understood her place. Instead, something else happened. A man who had stopped being surprised by people found one who surprised him. A room full of performance parted for the one person who refused to perform, and the woman who arrived with nothing, no name, no connections, no safety net, left as the only person Dante Murano had followed to the door. In his world, that meant everything, not because of what it looked like, because of what it was. She had stayed when it was hard. She had spoken when silence would have been safer. She had looked at the most dangerous man in the room and asked him a real question, and he had told her a real answer. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens when 2 people, surrounded by everything false, recognize something true. So tell me, would you have stayed in that room? And what do you think she texted him at 3 a.m.? Drop it below. I need to know.